In the story of Job, who was deprived of his family and his wealth, rails at God for the injustice of his fate. And God eventually speaks to Job directly and demands of him why he has even the right to ask. And in the 38th chapter, in a poetic passage, it speaks of that irony of asking too much. And God speaks to Job out of the whirlwind and says, "Have you entered the storehouses of the snow? Or have you seen the treasuries of the hail? From whose womb did the ice come forth? And who has given birth to the hoarfrost? The water has become hard like stone, and the face of the deep is frozen." What beautiful imagery for these difficult and cold times. Yet who are we to ask such questions? I don't know, but we ask. And we ask them every day, that we might in some moment receive a glimpse of an answer, even if it is the answer that says, "Be still and know that I am God."
Oh, beautiful the march of days, the seasons come and go. The hand that shaped the rose hath wrought the crystal of the snow, has set the hoary frost of heaven, the flowing waters sealed, and laid a silent loveliness on hill and wood and field.
Though it is no longer formally Christmas time, what other Sunday could we possibly sing our opening hymn, "We Three Kings of Orient Are," the last step on the journey that is Christmas? Shall we sing together hymn number 259, found in your hymn book?
Thank you.
Before we start the responsive reading, let me give you some context for that and what you see at the top of your bulletin. We are again the host of the Community Martin Luther King Day observance, which will include a performance, a world premiere of an opera that is still being written called I Dream, and it will take place in this space a week from tomorrow. Some of us are also going to be in the choir that is celebrating the occasion before that. You're going to be here all evening and you will be glad of it. But all this month it seemed to be appropriate to bring the words of Martin Luther King Jr. to us in worship at the top of your bulletin and through our responsive invocations so that we may embody them, not just remember them. These are words from his famous speech delivered in August of 1963. Will you share them with me? There are those who are asking the devotees of civil rights, when will you be satisfied? We can never be satisfied as long as the Negro is the victim of unspeakable horrors of police brutality. We can never be satisfied as long as our bodies, heavy with the fatigue of travel, cannot gain lodging in the motels of the highways and the hotels of the cities. We can never be satisfied as long as the Negro's basic mobility is from a smaller ghetto to a larger one. We can never be satisfied as long as our children are stripped of their selfhood and robbed of their dignity by signs stating, "For whites only." We cannot be satisfied as long as the Negro in Mississippi cannot vote and the Negro in New York believes he has nothing for which to vote. Oh no, we are not satisfied and will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters. And righteousness like a rising stream. Indeed. Keep those words with you if you need to by putting that in your pocket and taking it alongside. Again, my name's Fred Wooden. I'm your preacher. There's my wonderful comrade in worship, the choir, my wonderful partner in making music, Marilyn Osenchuk, and all of you. You're all here at Fountain Street Church. If you weren't here a few moments ago, there's much going on in this church. You can find it by looking in your order of worship, especially lunch today. You needn't pay a penny, but you must be willing to contribute at least a little bit of time to help take down all of our Christmas and look forward to the coming year. And so please do join me in the social hall after worship for a vegetarian, it is vegan. It is very much a vegan lunch, but you'll love it. It's wonderful vegetable lentil soup and fresh bread. We even have some gluten-free options for those of you who wish to be scrupulous in that direction. And then after you've had the nourishment of soul and body, you can help us take down all of our Christmas times and we can be a community together. That's what you need to know, and to be back here next week, especially for those occasions I just mentioned. And now I wish wonderfully for our choir to do something beautiful, but they've substituted something else. Am I right, Miss Marilyn? We're going to be doing, what piece was it again? Hymn number 58, which actually is our final hymn, but I'm going to pull a fast one on you, so you're going to want to hear it now anyway. That's right. If you want to watch what they're singing, hymn number 58, which we've never done here, so it'll be an adventure for us all.
The year is done.
So it's January. I've been telling people I gotta love Michigan because it doesn't want to love me back in January. My hands are getting all dried and cracked, and unless you love winter sports, I'm not seeing an upside. Just don't see one. And as I tell people, as I aim in a month I'm going to be Medicareable. By the way, I've come up with a proverb. It's mine. You have to give me credit. So you have to give me the attribution in your papers. And 3/4 of cold is old. Think about it. The older I get, the colder I feel. And C-O-L-D, get it? Good for you. Good. I want to talk about for a moment, as we head into this time of prayer and meditation and silence, how there is a kind of strenuous quality to life that just comes along with being alive. I mean, I love being alive, but I also know it's work. And it's difficult. And it's demanding. And it's taxing. And sometimes it's not rewarding. It sometimes makes you wonder, gee whiz, what am I going to do? And I think the most honest prayer is admitting you're tired. Back when I was a much younger preacher, not that high, but that's to give you a sense of how long it's been. I had a gentleman pray over me at one of my installations. It was 1985. That's how long ago it was. Wow. And he had become a liberal religionist like me from the Black Baptist tradition. He was already an older man. And it was a busy day, and I was frantic. And Ewell Hopkins was his name. He had been someone who had been a guide to me as a student. And I told him I was tired, and he said, "Fred, I understand you being tired, but you're not where I am." And he twinkled a little bit and said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well," and he was already 75 or 80 years old and had been in a serious automobile accident and had to use a crutch and everything like that. And he said, "Fred, the word you need to hear is weary." Weary. It's related to the word worn, as in been through so much that you feel worn, as in rubbed, as in friction, as in used up. And if you're a person of African ancestry in this country, weariness starts the day after you're born. And so I want you to think about your weariness, because it's not unique to the people of African ancestry in the United States, or to people of color in general. But it is a fact that we sometimes, in our more privileged positions, overlook our weariness until we cannot overlook it anymore. Whether there's a pain in one's hip, or a twinge in one's chest, or a worn outness about a bank account that just never quite has enough in it, or a child or a spouse whose struggles are in your life. I want you to talk about what wears you down. I want you to think about the weariness that life demands. Because in the end, our unity as human beings will be through our common struggle and weariness, not through our common pleasures and happiness. You've been there, right? When have you been most close to people? When you shared a common struggle, a common sadness, a common pain, a common fear. That's where we need to be in prayer. We need to be there. So let's do that. Oh, ancient one more weary than all of us together, who has seen all the trials of the world come and go and come again, for whom the presence of injustice is as regular as raindrops, and for whom the loss of life without meaning is as regular as the ticking of a clock. You understand. You understand better than us all. And maybe that's all we can ask for. To be granted some understanding, because weariness is the tax life demands. Like Job, sitting in pain, having been robbed of all that he knew, we are tempted to demand an answer, an explanation, to give account. Yes, explain why. But the answer is never an explanation, but a revelation. We come here to experience a revelation that our weariness, as real and as deep as it is, has meaning, has value. That we have spent and lost for something greater than ourselves. No, we have not seen the treasure houses of the snow. We have not seen the places that the hail is stored, but we have seen love. And we have felt hope, and we have seen the promise of justice. And if being a little more weary is what it takes to make that true again, we ask for strength in our weariness to continue the journey upon these things. And all that within us wears us down. We pause now for that prayer which is found most keenly in the presence of silence. And amen. As the choir prepares to sing, I want to let you know that this piece is the creation of two of our own members who, now deceased, though still have this as a blessing for us. This comes from a wonderful piece called "The Magic at the Heart of the Universe." And it was written, the words were written by our own Adrian Swets and sat by the late Jack Kimmel. They are still with us with their gift of beauty and music. It is my custom, lo, these last year or two, to lift up the memory of those whose lives came to their completion at this time in this year and years past. Though they are absent from us in body, they are present to us in heart and mind. Lives that built this place and made this church and gave us life and hope. I lift up the names of Roger Matthews, Sally Hillman, Janet Banta, Jim Carpenter, Arthur Hamp, Marion Lathrop, Honorine Soper, Fred Garbrecht, George Ruich, Irmgard Getchius, and Mary Kindle. El Malay Rachamim, God filled with mercy, dwelling in the heavens heights, bring proper rest beneath the wings of your Shekhinah to the souls of our beloved who have gone to their eternal place of rest. May you, who are a source of mercy, shelter them beneath your wings eternally. Bind their souls to you and to we the living, that they may rest at peace, that we may be at peace. And let us say, Amen. We resume the journey. Liberal religion, as I've often remarked, is not a place but a path, a journey of mind and heart and soul toward truth, toward love, toward justice. That seed is very old. It was in modern times for us planted by John Robinson, who was the pastor to the Plymouth Pilgrims of the rock fame. He said in his writings that there was ever more light waiting to break forth from God's holy word, that even the scripture had not been exhausted of its meanings. Ever more light. That has been the byword of liberal religion since it began. Ever more light, more knowledge, more than we know. This year, taking Robinson seriously, I chose to do exactly that by taking a path through old words to find new thoughts, chiefly through the words of the Psalms. Psalms that we know parts of, if not all of. The Christian church regards them as revelations that speak truth written on stones. But I prefer the Jewish point of view that sees them as spiritual wisdom from people who wrestled with meaning and hope and truth and left them as testimonies to their own spiritual lives. Such a thing as that, if such an example would be Psalm 19. Between here and Easter, I'm going to be expounding on a portion of each of those between Psalm 19 and Psalm 30, a nice sequence with much to offer. The heavens are telling the glory of God, and the firmament proclaims God's handiwork. Day to day pours forth speech, and night to night declares knowledge. There is no speech, there are no words. Their voice is not heard, yet their voice goes out through all the earth, and their words to the end of the world. In the heavens, God has set a tent for the sun, which comes out like a bridegroom from his wedding canopy, and like a strong man runs its course with joy. Its rising is from the end of the heavens, and its circuit to the end of them, and nothing is hidden from his heat. The law of God is perfect, reviving the soul. The decrees of God are sure, making wise the simple. The precepts of God are right, rejoicing the heart. The commandment of God is clear, enlightening the eyes. So there I was, I think it was the year 2000. I was in Vienna, my first trip. I've only been there twice, but it was brand new to me. And that was a pilgrimage to my musical self, because as a music major I had read and learned and studied all the great names that had lived there. Schubert, Beethoven, and Mozart, and Brahms, and all those other fellows. So I was eager to find all the places associated with this music I loved so much. So there I was. I found it, the one and only apartment left that Mozart lived in. He moved a lot. Why? He was broke a lot. So when he couldn't pay the rent, he had to move. And most of those places are gone now, but one remains on the Blutgasse, Blood Street. It used to be a place where there was an abattoir. It's within sight of the Stephansdom, the great cathedral, but it's on a narrow road, and it's now a place of veneration. There's a flag from Austria hanging outside. It says Mozart House, and I climbed the stairs in the inner courtyard up 3 flights. It's still an apartment house. People use it. But this apartment is devoted to him. maybe 5 or 6 rooms. And all through the rooms, they have little listening stations. They didn't put new furniture there. They're almost empty of furniture because nothing from his personal belongings is left. He had to sell it all, after all. But there are little listening stations and stories about what was going on in his life. And so I'm listening. And it dawns on me as I'm listening to the last scene of the marriage of Figaro, a beautiful moment in which the ludicrous count has made terrible accusations against his wife, and his wife forgives him in a song so lofty, so generous, that it's almost Christ-like in its generosity. That it dawned on me that I was standing in the room where those notes were born. I was standing in the place where that vision of beauty happened, and tears fell out of my face. I stood there and listened to it 3, 4 times. I was quite the nuisance, because I wanted to capture that moment of saying, I am here in this place. I went around the corner, almost literally, actually around the other side of the old city, and found an apartment where Beethoven lived. And again, I put on the headphones, and I stood in the room where the Emperor Concerto emerged from Beethoven's brain onto a page. I made myself quite embarrassed that day, and I didn't care. I sought out all the altars of my devotion, but I didn't recognize one until I passed it on the street. I was going through a street, and if you know European cities, the streets are quite narrow, even around large buildings. And as I came around a corner, I was standing near the Burg Theater, and there was a plaque on the theater, and it said it was here that Haydn's Creation was first sung. You cannot spit in Vienna without hitting a spot like that, I have to admit. But instantly, I thought of the great chorus. The heavens are telling the glory. My mind was instantly filled with the music. I couldn't go around a corner without hearing music that I had loved. But that one stuck with me. And I mention it today because those are the words of Psalm 19. It's the first great chorus of the creation, although there are others, and it's a magnificent piece. I want you to know that when I create the order of worship every week, it happens on Tuesday, but the sermon doesn't happen until Friday. And so I'm going to pull a fast one on you. We are not going to sing the hymn at the end that's printed there. We're going to sing our version of that, which is the spacious firmament on high. I'm just warning you. I already warned the choir. I warned my music director, who was a little skeptical, but allows this. We can probably pull it off. Because I didn't even think of that coincidence until I was trying to gather my thoughts. And why am I telling you all this? Because the psalm is one verse after another of praise of the majesty of creation, the bridegroom of the sun going here and there, and the law of God is perfect, the decrees of God are sure. And here's the verse that stuck at me, and there are 2 of them, one of which is, the commandment of God is clear, enlightening the eyes. And I thought, isn't that interesting? Because we use the word enlightenment to describe a whole era of European history, when we discovered the universe in new ways. Galileo finding the universe was bigger and more interesting than we knew. Linnaeus discovering that plants are related and that they can be connected to one another, and others, all of which enlightened our eyes to the complexity of the world and gave us modernity. For all of them, the universe was a mechanism that could be explored, even understood. And for some, for many indeed, it implied a rational designer. The modern evangelical believer in intelligent design is actually very much an Enlightenment thinking person. In the 18th century, an English theologian, William Paley, famously made this observation. In crossing a heath, suppose I pitched my foot against a stone and were asked how the stone came to be there. I might possibly answer that for anything I know to the contrary, it had laid there forever. But suppose I found a watch upon the ground, and it should be inquired how the watch happened to be in that place. I should hardly think the watch has always been there. There must have existed at some time or some place an artificer who formed the watch, who comprehended its construction and designed its use. That was the dominant way of thinking about God in the 18th century, especially in the English Enlightenment, that the universe is a grand clock, intricately connected, and yes, it looks that way, and you can catalog all the parts, and you can see it all works, and Isaac Newton wrote down all the formulas. How could such a thing happen except that a mind put it that way? And that's where intelligent design has its origins, not in the Bible per se, but in this desire to see in the universe evidence of the glories of God, very much as the Psalm says. But he was not alone. There was another point of view. And other scientists were taking a different tack. My favorite is Erasmus Darwin. You got to love the name for the first. Erasmus Darwin, who is in fact that Darwin's grandfather. He was a clergy person, but one of those tinkering clergy who collected things and became something of a natural scientist. And he wrote a poem that went in a slightly different direction. In fact, it too became a hymn in my Unitarian hymn book. Roll on, ye stars, exult in youthful prime. Mark with bright curves the printless steps of time. Flowers of the sky, ye too must age and yield. Fray as your silken sisters of the field. Star after star from heaven's high arch shall rush. Suns sink on suns and systems crush. He was describing, without knowing it, the Big Bang. His mind was open to the idea that the universe was an open book that he had not finished reading yet. And so I give you two people to think of at this moment. Paley, behold the clock of the universe, and the universe that must be made by God. And Darwin over here is saying, what a majestic and interesting place this is. I must learn more. Let's put it this way. One rationalized his belief. One reasoned about facts. Now, I'm using these terms very particularly because rationalizing is something we all do. That is to justify a conclusion by harvesting the facts that we want to use for it. We all do it. I famously have told, famously meaning you're going to remember it, the story about the Cossack riding on his horse through the Russian countryside, spies a farm with a barn, and on the barn are painted archery targets, and on the middle of each archery target is an arrow right in the middle. He goes to the farmer and demands to meet this terrific archer that must be in the Tsar's army, and the farmer laughs. Ha, 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 you must be joking, Mr. Cossack. And the Cossack said, you dare to mock the king's Cossack? He said, come with me, says the farmer. And shows him to a man that in earlier times we would have called a simpleton, a man of limited intellectual capacity. He says, you jest with me, farmer, prepare to die. And the farmer says, wait a minute. You don't understand. He shoots the arrows, then he paints the targets. That's rationalizing. You make your point and then go find evidence to support it. Reasoning is exactly the opposite. It looks at all the arrows and says, not where did they land, where did they come from? Where am I in the midst of it? Reasoning means emptying your mind of what you want to be true so that that which is true can find its way in. Because that's the hard part. Emptying your own mind of what you want to be true so that what is true can find its way in. Some years ago, I was given a book by a cousin called Einstein's Unfinished Symphony. It's not an ironic title. You see, in 1915, Einstein predicted the existence of something called gravitational waves. Waves of gravity. But they are so low in frequency, so rare, that they are almost audible if you could hear them. They're not way up here with radio waves. They're so low. But how do you detect such a thing? Well, they're so exquisitely tiny that you must create two different observatories, thousands of miles apart, that are 4 kilometers long each, so that they can measure a variance in space-time that is about 1,000th the diameter of a proton. That's quiet. That is the kind of inner quiet we would have to achieve inwardly to hear the truth that we think we know but don't. And there is my point. Because the earlier verse of the psalm is what really got me. There is no speech, nor are there words. Their voices are not heard, said the psalm, referring to the heavens. The stars do not talk. They only make space wiggle by the distance of 1,000th of a proton. You have to be that quiet to hear that truth. So the psalmist is not a prophet. The psalmist understands the wisdom that is available to us all. That as deep as the wave that can stretch 4 kilometers by 1,000th of a proton. The deepest of wisdom can only be found in a place that quiet. How many of us have had minds that quiet? 2 years ago, I made my one and perhaps only trip to India, so I made the most of it. And I made sure that I went to Bodh Gaya. It is the place where the Buddha reached enlightenment, under a tree where he sat. He came to that tree almost by accident, for he had almost starved himself to death in ascetic practices. And a young woman named Sujata saw him and fed him some rice gruel, and thus refreshed, he resolved he would sit under this tree until he reached the truth. And legend says he sat there for 45 days, never once got up, penetrating ever deeper into the reality of reality. And when he reached it, he stood up, and he was the enlightened one. I used the word enlightenment a little while ago, didn't I? To be enlightened is to reach a place of such profound silence that truth can be heard. Now, the irony of all this is that if you go to Bodh Gaya today, it's a madhouse. There's a temple lit by bright lights that look like Christmas. There are monks around it chanting through amplified speakers. There are shops where you can buy all your Buddhist goods. There are many temples all around. There are many guards because it's a terrorist-susceptible spot. And yes, I did in fact see a man riding an elephant down the street. In other words, it is the least quiet place I was in all of India. And I mention that not to point to their hypocrisy, but the ironic proof that true silence of the kind that it takes to move truth the distance of 1,000th of a proton, that kind of silence is unthinkable, even terrifying to contemplate. But that is what it takes to get to the truth. Absolute truth is like absolute zero. We can't actually get there. And as closer we come, the more esoteric it becomes. We reach the point where the Buddhists are right and realize that the absolute truth is nothingness. Or as more accurately, no thingness. Just being. There would be no things left at all. Just being. And if that sounds weird, welcome to the Buddha's world. Nature's silence is its one remark, said Annie Dillard. Nature's silence is its one remark, and every flake of the world is a chip off that old mute and immutable block. The Chinese say we live in a world of 1,000 things, and each of those 10,000 things cries out to us precisely nothing. The enigma I'm putting before you, friends, is that when we go looking for truth, it's going to be found in the place where there is nothing. It is not a thing. It is not a place. It is not a where. It is not a what. It is a being that none of us can actually encounter. That's what makes this job of mine so difficult and so satisfying. Every week I have to point you toward nothing and make you glad you came and found out. And yes, I could have quoted Paul Simon's song here, and I could have gone in any number of other directions. But here it is. I've been talking for 15 minutes about silence, and I've already overstayed my welcome. But the end of the psalm is the lesson you need to have more than the other. Because yes, truth lies in a silence so profound we cannot imagine it, and yet we must seek it and fail, and seek it again and fail again. As the psalmist, whoever wrote it, understood, because after talking about the majesty of the universe and the sun as a bridegroom and the laws and the precepts and the immensity of God, the psalmist comes to the end with the words you have heard me say many times. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be acceptable to you, my rock and my redeemer. The psalmist knows that the psalmist has not spoken the truth. The psalmist knows that whatever the psalmist has seen is but a shadow, a reflection, at most, the vaguest 10,000th of a proton's bit of truth, and therefore is humble about making any claim to its majesty. The earth may be majestic in the universe, but words are not. Whenever I step into this pulpit, or any pulpit for that matter, it is overwhelming, because the task is always greater than any preacher can shoulder. The words on the page are never right. I'll give you a clue. I've left half of this unsaid today. In my mind and heart, I know the truth I want to point you toward, but it is always a wordless, silent truth that I cannot name, because to name it is to profane it. Whatever I say will be inadequate. And yet, I must try, because I want you to try as well. To reach into the quieter, sublimely quiet, utterly silent place where the truth can possibly make itself known to you. And that's why when I say those words at the end of each sermon, I really mean them. Because I know I have failed. Because success is not possible. I may have stumbled toward the truth a little bit. Stumbled at best. But now and then, as I go face first into the ground, I look and see something that could be the truth. And so can you. And so once again, I say with utmost humility and honesty that I wish that the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be acceptable to you and to that which is my rock and my redeemer. I shall try again next week. Let us all try next week. So let us sing the words of the hymn and the tune of Mr. Haydn, which you will find as number 283. 283. 283. It is long. It's worth it. And then I'll see you in the kitchen for soup. Thank you. It is an honor to serve you. It is an honor to have you as my people. words of Theodore Parker, who said, "Be ours a religion which like sunshine goes everywhere. Its temple is all space, its shrine the good heart, its creed all truth, its ritual works of love, and its profession of faith divine living." With this in our hearts and minds, week by week we may take a step ever closer to that ideal, knowing that this day, and indeed every day, is a day which the Lord has made. Let us rejoice in it and be glad. Amen and amen.